Hey, and welcome back to the Tales of Yore devlogs. I'm surprised I managed to get up the confidence to do another devlog, but not nearly as surprised as I am that someone has decided to watch it. Thank you for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to describe the content creation process in Tales of Yore. It's a reasonably complicated system now, and I've been asked to describe how it all fits together. Roughly, the content in the game is broken into the following parts. Audio-video. The game has sprites and sounds for monsters, players, places, NPCs, items, effects, and a host of other things. Given the layers of player customization, this takes its own special place. I'll touch on the tools, assets, and systems used to render the game. Mapping. Tales of Yore is set in a rich world that's planned to be huge. A big part of the content creation is the tile mapping of the land of Yore and its inhabitants. Here we'll look at the tooling being used, along with the layers configuration and the integration of scripting. Data files. Everything in Tales is data driven. Well, not everything yet, but I'd like it to be. The final section of the video will cover the custom tooling that I've built for Tales to manage the ever increasing number of NPC scripts, dungeon definitions, and monster configurations. Coincidentally, the order of those items is how I approach each content update. First, I make sure I have the right sprite resources. Then I map out the new areas of the world, finally filling the world full of life and adventure with the data files. Okay, let's get going, starting with sound. It was only in the last few years that I started to realise how much sound adds to a world. Just the chirping of birds or washing of waves in the background of a scene can take it from pixels to atmospheric, even more so with the music. The right tracks really build the feel of a place. Some of the music in Tales is CC0, which basically relies on me listening to hundreds of tracks to try and find something that really fits what the world needs. When I can afford it, I commission the fantastic Cletus Lupus to make me custom music. I'll include a link to his work in the comments. Basically, if you play the game and hear anything that's really good, you're listening to Cletus's work. Next up is graphics, and as most people know, Tales is using the mighty Mini Fantasy asset set by Krishna Policio. I hope I haven't butchered that name too much. Again, see the link in the comments. The Mini Fantasy set is incredible, spanning masses of different locations and themes, with a ridiculous number of items, monsters, and set dressing. The set is really fantastic because it's constantly updated and being extended. It's lo-fi, which I love, but also means I can extend it even with my limited pixel art skills. And it's patron supported. As a boss level patron, I get to commission a piece of work each month. Krishna is also a joy to work with, very receptive to comments and questions, clearly always trying to get the best out of his work. However, there is one limitation that most of us mini fantasy users seem to hit. The main character is naked, and while there are many costumes available, they can't really be mixed and matched like you'd expect to see on an online RPG. If you do choose to use the costumes provided, you end up with a massive number of sprites per character, and that wouldn't scale very well at all. So here's how I made it work. First, take the basic sprite with the animations that you want. Next, create an outfit sprite that fits the idle frame of the animation. Add a JSON file describing how different parts of the body move on each frame. Say the head bobs up and down while the walk animation is playing, so should the hat. Finally, draw the outfit sprite over the naked guy, offset by the amount specified in the JSON file. Got that? Well, yeah, it is a bit fiddly, but if you take this approach, you have a single frame of animation for each item the character can wear. You can also layer these separate parts for hair, hat, body, legs, feet, etc., creating a full paper doll effect. Since the base animations are the same for all humanoid characters, there's just a single JSON file for each animation. It does mean that every time I add a visible item to the game, I have to create the corresponding overlay, but that's really small overhead compared to storing every frame of every piece of clothing. The definition of these pieces and their layers is defined in the data files that we'll talk about a little later. As you can see, Tales isn't too smart in rendering, it just essentially blits sprites to the screen, or textured quads if you prefer. On the bright side, the browser canvas API appears to be extremely optimized for this case, and within reason does a pretty good job of it. This means I don't have to worry about engines, acceleration, or any of the minutiae that I obsessed with in my past life. This is a total win. The world of Yore is slowly growing. Right now it's sitting at about 250,000 tiles on the map. Tile mapping, for anyone that doesn't know, is simply creating a world out of a set of pieces, often called tiles. Each tile or set of tiles represents an item in the world, a tree or a rock or maybe even the ground. Tile maps often have layers, like ogres and onions. Each layer represents a type of thing in the world, the floor layer or the walls layer or even the sky. Creating and editing these tile maps can become a real time sink. In the past I've done this manually, editing a text file. Yes, really. I've written my own custom tile editor and I've used various off-the-shelf tools. When I started Tales, I was lucky enough to happen across LDTK, link again in the comments. It's a tool that was initially put together for the Ludum Dare game jam, but has since grown and become a fully fledged mapping tool. LDTK is one of those tools that you can feel the author has been doing what you're trying to do for a very, very long time. Everything about it is optimized for speed of content creation and reliability. It's currently coping easily with my giant tile map levels. Tales uses the following layers: floor, used for tiles that appear underneath the player; walls, used for tiles that block the player; decal, used for decorations over the walls and floor; objects, used for placing objects in the world. Why isn't this just worlds? Well, quite often I want objects to overlap walls. Simple. Tops, used for tiles that are drawn above the player, like when a player goes behind a tree or house. Reflective is a special layer which is used for tiles that the player will reflect in, say water or shiny floors. And then finally, entities. This isn't really a tile layer, but rather a way of placing data elements in the world. If there's a mob, NPC or light, they're placed as an entity. The nice thing about entities is they can hold configuration that can point to data files. Again, we'll talk about those later. Building tile maps is reasonably easy. I take the hand-drawn maps I created at the start of the game and tried to map rectangular zones or levels onto it. Each one appears in LDK as a separate tile map. Placing tiles is essentially like painting pixels. It can be slightly irksome to keep thinking about the layers as you go, but you get used to it pretty quickly. Levels are linked together by a special entity called a portal. Portals have configuration that tells the game which level and what location the player should be transported to when they enter it. They can even have conditional scripting that controls whether the portal will work or not. Do you have the key to the door, for instance? Again, these conditionals link to data files which describe everything about the game world itself. One of the nice things I got set up in Tales early on was the automatic reloading of the game whenever a game file changes. This makes testing out maps very easy, and as soon as the change is made in LDTK, the game client reloads with the latest maps, revalidates everything, and is ready to test. My general approach of change, test, becomes a very natural process. LDTK constantly amazes me at every turn, and it feels like I still have so much room in the tool to grow into. The final piece of the puzzle is the data files. Now, I know a lot of tutorials out there show creating a class or game object for each type of creature in your game, effectively creating the definition of its behavior as a piece of code. I for one hate this approach, and honestly don't know why anymore. Since code and data files became so closely linked, is there really any problem with having a class for every monster type you have? I just don't know. For me at least, I prefer separation of concerns, configuration versus engine, stats versus rules, data versus code. Outside of the rendering of audio and video, Tales is a big old simulation really. There are actors wandering around in the world and they interact based on a set of rules for combat, for crafting, for magic, for the physical world, and well, everything really. However, all these things are governed by the same set of rules. The simulation applies the rules without knowing which specific creature, item or NPC it is. It treats them all equally. What changes the result is the characteristics of that thing. For example, a monster is defined by its damage, armor class, hit points, etc. So is the player, so are the NPCs. The definition of these things is contained within a JSON file, the data. The game loads these files at server and client startup and applies the values to the actors and items it creates within the simulation. This allows me to do nice things like run static analysis across the data files, evaluate the balance and compare the results of players running through the game. While this is totally possible when the game code contains this configuration, it becomes much easier when the configuration is completely externalized and the data can be analyzed outside of the context of a running game. Of course, that's an awful lot of data. Currently there's data for items, monsters, effects, faces, NPC, scripts, and probably a whole bunch of things I can't remember right now. This results in a whole bunch of big chunks of JSON. My previous game taught me the hard lesson that managing files like this becomes very cumbersome, especially as they start to scale out. That's why in Legends I ended up writing a tool that explicitly knew about the game files and how they relate to each other. In Tales I started out with that in mind and created an Electron-based tool that manages, analyzes and validates the data files and the game world that they define. Initially it just validated that the JSON was valid and matched the right schema, but it's grown over time to have custom validation routines that check things like balance, production costs, gold drops and many other tiny facets. The tool also has a report section that pulls out the collections of items, abilities, etc. and lets me view them in relation to each other. This helps with understanding the progression of a player through levels of combat and crafting. There's one other big time sink in RPG development: quests. They require a lot of detail and cross-checking to make sure the player can't get stuck or worse, exploit the system. Testing a quest by actually playing it, while fun, can suck up all the development time available. As you can imagine by now, everything in the quest scripts is actually JSON file within the tool. But since the data files are separate to the main engine, there was nothing stopping me adding a test harness that let me try out quests without actually playing them through the game. I can visit NPCs, obtain objects, kill monsters and complete the quests, exercising every path without leaving the tool. Originally I needed to validate this in game regularly, but now I've reached a point where I feel confident that once validated and tested in the tool, the quests will work in the game. Quests receive an extra layer of validation where the tool's quest engine can attempt to automatically complete the quest by interpreting the steps and looking for solutions. This has been invaluable. The tool validation ensures that I don't release quests that can't be completed. Tales is a big project now, with a lot of moving parts. It wouldn't still be hanging together without some great people, tools and detailed validation that you've seen here. And that's it today. Devlog 2 complete. I could go into a lot more detail, but maybe that's enough for now. If there's something specific you'd like to hear more about, please drop me a comment. Thank you for watching, and I appreciate the support so far.